if an obscure cult classic show like Eerie Indiana had a baby with a show like The Haunting Hour, well, you'd end up with something like Spooksville. And I can make such a claim because check my qualifications. I've talked about each series ad nauseum at this point.
This dude's a yapper, that's for sure.
Oh, just ignore him. He's got a little bit of an ego since we changed his voice to be a little bit less grating to listen to.
Too bad we can't do the same to your voice, got him.
Anyways, we might tinker around with it a little bit here and there, but moving forward, this is the new and approved Artie Elwoods.
Not too crazy about the last name.
And I'm not too crazy about all this sidetracking. I mean, I'm just trying to talk about Spooksville. Okay, so between 1995 and 1998, a series of 24 books called Spooksville were published. And unlike, say, Dead Time Stories or Bone Chillers, which were clearly books published around the same time frame looking to cash in on the Goosebumps hype, Spooksville was very much its own thing. For starters, it has a central cast of characters, and from what I've read online, it gets rather violent and really isn't suitable for younger children. But nearly 20 years later, in 2013, this book series got turned into a TV series that aired on the long but not forgotten Hub Network, spanning just one season and a total of 22 episodes. An episode for almost every book. But some clearly didn't make the cut. My heart absolutely breaks for you, aliens in the sky. How I would have loved to see you on the silver screen. I never read that book. I never read any of these books. I'm just a really big fan of aliens. But the show ended as soon as it began, presumably because of low viewership, but also the show had nowhere to go by the end. Once again, there's only a finite amount of books for the show to follow. Usually this doesn't matter for Monster of the Week type shows, but Spooksville has a central cast of characters and an overarching plot, both of which I should get into before we get into the ranking itself. So, from the top. First up is Adam. He's our protagonist throughout the series, and he serves a dual purpose. Not only is he the main character, but he's also the audience surrogate. You see, this series begins with Adam and his dad moving to none other than Springsville. Yeah, Spooksville is just a nickname the characters give their town. But with Adam being the new kid in town, he's essentially a fish out of water. He's taking in all the characters, settings, and weird happenings in a similar vein to us, the audience. But other than that, Adam is your typical protagonist. He's brave, he's stoic, and really, he's just trying to find his mom. But more on that in just a bit. Then you got Sally, the girl of the trio. I mean, come on. It's not a live-action children's show if our central cast of characters doesn't consist of a protagonist guy, a nerdy guy, and a girl. Personally, I think Ned's Declassified had the best trio in TV history, but that's besides the point. But Sally's role within the series is the one of the skeptic. Kinda. She's not full Dana Scully skeptic. In fact, she's only slightly skeptical. Not that she doesn't believe in the paranormal or the supernatural. She very much does. It's just that she'll oftentimes suggest a more rational explanation first, before jumping headfirst into the lunacy. I mean, with all the shit that happens in this series, it would be kinda hard to be a strong skeptic. Then to cap off our little trio, we got Watch, which isn't really his actual name. It's a nickname because he wears 4 different pairs of watches, for some reason. He's the nerd of the group. He's got the knowledge and the equipment to assess any and all situations. One thing I really like about Watch is that he's surprisingly not the stereotypical nerd. In fact, his relationship with Adam demonstrates this perfectly, because personality-wise, you can really see that Watch is a lot like Adam, and it's just that he has more knowledge of technology and the occult. And this fact is just really reflective in their casual banter. It really shouldn't be, and yet it is, a rather refreshing take on this kind of character archetype. And then last but not least, you got Anne. Well, not a member of our core crew, she's in nearly every episode, serving as a pseudo-antagonist for the series. I say pseudo because her intentions are never consistent. Sometimes it seems like she's helping them out, when in actuality, it's just one long con that secretly benefits her. And sometimes she seems like she's opposing our main characters, when in actuality, she's trying to help them out. And this isn't necessarily a complaint, because if anything, it keeps you on your toes whenever she's in an episode as you try to suss out her true intentions. And then you got a bunch of different side characters that populate the town of Spooksville that make appearances here and there throughout the entire series. I'm just gonna quickly highlight these characters because I feel like they each have their own time to shine in specific episodes that I will cover down the line. I need to learn breath control sometimes. Characters like Miss Clench, a vampire, or Principal Blackwater, a ex-vampire, now vampire hunter, and this homeless guy who actually used to be the mayor of Spooksville, all have their own spotlight episodes but do appear sporadically throughout the entire series. Meanwhile, characters like Stanley, the local nerdy scary cat, or Mr. Spiny, the resident librarian who is really obsessed with bones, or this police officer who has a hook for a hand, all populate this town to make it feel more lived in, but never get proper episodes dedicated to them. Which is totally fine. They all have their minor moments here and there, and really, that's all I could ever ask for. If anything, it makes the town feel a bit more lived in. I mean, this is exactly what Eerie, Indiana did too. But now it's time to talk about the series' long plots, and just being honest, I'm not the biggest fan. Yeah, okay. This show is episodic by nature. However, there is one main storyline throughout the entire season. And if I'm being honest, it's pretty lacking. So, everything revolves around Adam's mom. You see, Adam and his dad moved to Spooksville in the first place once the mom mysteriously goes missing. It's essentially a driving force for the first half of the series for Adam, as he has reasons to believe that his mom is out there and still alive. And for that alone, it works. I mean, why would this kid put himself into these dangerous scenarios in the first place? Oh, because it might bring him closer to finding his mom? Yeah, sure, I can buy it. And by all means, the mystery is built up rather well. Slowly, we find out that the mom originally came from Spooksville herself, and that she might have ties to witchcraft. They find a little bit of information here and a little bit of information there, and then they find her old Letterman jacket that contains a key that can unlock some doors around town, and they found her a little less than halfway through the entire series? Really? That fast? Yeah, okay, spoiler alert. It's not actually Adam's mom. It's like a whole spell thing, and I'll talk about it more when I get to that specific episode. But for the back half of the series, by all means, Adam has his mom back. Yeah, she's acting a little strange and just kind of out of it, but this whole thing isn't given much time or attention as the actual storyline of trying to find Adam's mom. Truly, once they find this character, the whole storyline just kind of takes a backseat until the last 2 episodes. But hey, we can talk more about this later on, I guess. So there is 22 episodes in total. However, there is exactly one 2-parter that I will be counting as one entry. So therefore, 21 ranking spots in total. And with all that, we are prepped and ready. But first, let's check out some fan art. This piece of fan art is done by none other than Sea Sponge over on Instagram, and hot damn, is this amazing. Not only is the color just great, but the perspective is crazy cool. Drawing at a fisheye lens angle isn't easy to do, and yet they pull it off beautifully. Anyways, go give them a follow over on Instagram, links will be in the description. They have an amazing art style and just a lot of fun other art pieces. And Sea Sponge, thanks for the fan art. I think moving forward, I'm just going to put the fan art showcase in the middle of the videos, kind of like a intermission of sorts. But for my first piece of fan art, I had to put up front and center, like a proud dad putting a picture on the fridge. Anyways, without further ado, let's rank every episode of Spooksville from worst to best. Enjoy. Sometimes in these ranking videos, it's hard to tell what's going to rank dead last. Other times, you watch an episode and immediately know, oh yeah, this one's at the bottom. And truthfully, this series has a lot of banger episodes, so the drastic dip in quality is surprising, to say the least.
Same could be said for your videos.
Oh my god, did you guys hear that? Do you think I have banger videos?
I didn't. No, like I meant that, you know. Like man, fuck you.
So this episode centers around Sally as she spends the day home alone while evil gnomes attack her. Well, attack her is a bit of an over-exaggeration. More like they just make a mess and that's kinda it. From start to finish, it's just Sally running around the house reacting to what damage the gnomes have done this time around. And it's just Sally. Adam and Watch only show up at the very end of the episode and immediately get captured as a means to raise the stakes for the story's climax. But outside of that, this really is just a bottle episode centered around Sally. It's actually one of a kind for this series. It's a shame too, because I think if you're gonna do one episode centered around just one of these main characters, Sally definitely is the better of the three. She's got the better versatility to be put into any scenario, but just like, gnomes? Really? It's funny too, because Goosebumps very famously has a gnome episode and book, and while I don't think too highly of that story, I can at least say the central threat of the gnomes work a lot better because they look scary and actually impose some sort of threat. Unlike this episode where the gnomes are just run-of-the-mill gnomes. If anything, their threat comes from their numbers. This episode is flooding with them, but at the same time, they're small and made of porcelain. Like, we even get a montage of Sally kicking some ass and like, look how easy it is to defeat these guys. I mean, if she just properly squatted up with the other two, even being outnumbered, they could have handled business so easily. We also just never get to see these little guys move. It kind of makes them feel lifeless and a little cheap.
Maybe it was a budget problem.
I mean, maybe, but this show actually has like really good production design. But the ending even fails to have any real tension or suspense, because the moment where Watch and Adam get tied up is the moment where Sally immediately resolves the problem. It was all just one big misunderstanding. You see, Sally accidentally took the king gnome and stored him inside, and the other gnomes didn't take this too lightly. So Sally just releases him and everything goes back to normal. But if this ending had any shot of being good, this final scene really needed some breathing room. Really make it feel like Watch and Adam are seriously in peril and have Sally come in and save the day at the very last second. But nah, they don't do that. These guys are captured and then immediately saved. Feels like a goddamn speed run. If there's any silver lining, it's that, at least for the start of the episode, it's a little fun. It's very reminiscent of a movie like Gremlins, just a bunch of creatures wreaking havoc, but without all of the personality of Gremlins. And that's my main takeaway. It doesn't deliver on the scares, which is fine, but it completely dropped the ball by somehow under-delivering on the fun aspect. Watching this show in order revealed that this episode was the first real big miss for me. Just a complete dud of an episode. From start to finish, it's hard to tell what they were even trying to go for with this one. I mean, are you scared of cats? No? Well, okay, keep it moving then. I'm not trying to sell this one short by any means. I'm just saying, that's how it really is. This episode centers around an ancient evil cat swapping places with Sally, turning her into a cat and the cat into a human. We then spend the rest of the episode following Adam and Watch, slowly piecing together what's going on, all while also interacting with this cat girl and occasionally noting how odd she is. Gee, I wonder why. But there's no real sense of urgency here. I mean, hell, even Sally's parents don't seem all too concerned about her sudden disappearance.
To be fair, nobody would care if you disappeared. Colin, hello.
The show's explanation is that Sally is kind of the type of girl to disappear for a little bit and then show up again randomly elsewhere, which is why her parents are so nonchalant, and I think that's just called bad parenting? That aside, a majority of this episode really is just these two bumbling around trying to solve a puzzle that we, the audience, have known the answer to from the jump. So any sense of mystery or suspension is just non-existent. Eventually, they do manage to figure out what's going on and locate Cat Sally, and even managed to team up with Anne to take on this cat lady, and oh man, this is some really bad makeup. This makeup is somehow worse than the Broadway production of Cats, but still significantly better than the 2019 Cats movie though.
So let's gather up a few more of the cats, and we'll try again, shall we?
Yeah, my apologies for showing you that without any warning. You really ought to warn someone about CGI James Corden cat, because that monstrosity really is not for the faint of heart. But even with the bad makeup aside, it's not much of a climactic battle to begin with, and it's done and over before you can even blink, which might just be for the better. But Anne saves the day and everything goes back to normal. Truly just a completely forgettable episode outside of the bad makeup, which is not a good reason to stand out for. This one's a rather typical technology bad kind of episode with a laughably bad premise. You see, if you use your phone, you get taken away by this fog. The easy solution here? Don't use your fucking phone! It's that simple! Like, yeah, at the start, when none of these kids know exactly what's going on, this kind of blunder is understandable, if not even expected. But like, the gang quickly catches on to the fact that using your phone results in pretty much death, and yet, they still use their phones. Like, in the climax of the episode, where Adam and Sally are the only two left, and they are both fully aware of the ramifications, Sally still has to check her phone for some reason. Like, okay, I know my phone will kill me, but I just gotta check Instagram real quick. I just posted a selfie. I'm trying to see how many likes it got. What the fuck? The only saving grace for this episode is its ending and overall message. Yeah, I maybe oversold the whole technology bad angle because that's not really what this episode is saying. There's not some boomer ghost dragging these kids away to oblivion for using their damn technology. Instead, it's just a little girl who died years ago trying to talk to her mom on the phone. And it's really sweet. She wasn't killing these kids because phones are bad, but because they're doing the one thing she couldn't do when she was alive. And Adam finally gives her the chance to make her peace. And thus, all these kids return from the fog completely unscathed and unharmed. Unfortunately, even through retrospect and looking at the bigger picture, the episode is still goofy in its execution. I mean, this is one of the easiest threats to avoid in not just the entire show, but the entire horror genre in general. This premise could work if these kids were just randomly disappearing, and no one could figure out why until the final minutes where they finally realized that the phones are the source of the problem. But nah, they figure this shit out by the halfway point. Like, only 3 kids disappear when they understand the root problem and properly warn the others, which really makes the rest of the episode just dumb. Like, how hard is it to stay away from your damn phone for 5 minutes?
You're starting to sound like your parents.
Oh my god. But yeah, bad concept that could have worked but doesn't, but does manage to have a very sincere ending. So, it at least got something right in the end. Quite literally, the ending is the only good thing here. Okay, so this one's going to be a little weird to talk about than the rest, probably because it's one of the more contextual episodes in this series. That is to say, it's the second to last episode and essentially wraps up the whole mom saga. So if you didn't care about any of these mom shenanigans, tough break, because we got a whole episode dedicated to it. So let me just very quickly recap this for the people who forgot already, or the people who skip my intros and just get straight to the ranking. I see you out there, Alex. Adam and his dad move to Spooksville after his mom disappears. Some things happen that lead Adam into believing that his mom is out there and alive in this very town. A bunch of stuff happens that I'll cover at some point in this video, but eventually they find Adam's mom and all's good and well. Except she's acting a little bit strange. She has moments here and there where she acts like the typical mother Adam remembers, but there's just moments where she's not fully there. It's not really given the proper attention, if I'm being honest. Which kind of makes this very episode a little rushed. Like, it's just one massive lore dump about Adam's mom and how she actually used to practice witchcraft with Anne's mother, but she eventually wanted out altogether, which created a rift between the two. Mainly because Adam's mom was in possession of this one red stone that has like super witchcraft properties, or whatever. The big twist in this episode is that Adam's mom actually isn't Adam's mom, or at least the one they brought back isn't Adam's mom. Yet, turns out it was Anne's mom the entire time, masquerading as Adam's mom as a ploy to get the red stone, which I wouldn't necessarily say it's convoluted, but it's just kind of a lot of unnecessary steps when you're a proficient magic user and have an army of homunculuses on your side. Like what? I'm gonna pretend to be this kid's mom and fuck his dad for literal months to get a new crystal for my gem collection? I mean, on the down low, Adam's dad can totally get it though. Understandably, I can see how one may like this episode. Like, if you were really invested and found this whole mom storyline compelling, then this episode could be pretty cathartic finally getting the whole backstory. However, I was never invested. The main story for the series has always kind of been one of the weaker aspects for me. More so when the fake mom entered the picture. Because once again, in the first half, when Adam was trying to find his mom, it's vague enough and works well for just being a general mystery component. But anything after that? Nah, you can keep it. Also, if I'm being completely honest, the whole revelation that Adam's mom was dabbling in witchcraft was not all too surprising. I mean, it's heavily hinted at throughout the series. You'd have to be dumb not to see this coming. But outside of all the lore, this episode just consists of these characters being chased around by these homunculi, which is exactly what happens in the 6th episode, but it's done a lot better there. So it's weak action and weak mom storytelling. Hey, out of morbid curiosity, how many times have I said mom so far?
Calculating. 19 total times.
Ooh, okay, I'm done saying mom. Whether I cared for this storyline or not, there is a silver lining for this episode. And that's the emotions that our main character Adam has to grapple with finding out the truth. Listen, I think it's a silly twist, but it's somewhat made up by foreseeing the roller coaster of emotions Adam has to deal with in this episode. If anything, that should have been the focal point. More emphasis should have been placed on that aspect. But perhaps that's what the next and final episode did. And we'll talk about that one much, much later. Listen, Watch is probably one of my favorite characters in this series, and I kind of explained why in the intro to this video. So by all means, a Watch-centric episode exploring his depth of character and how he coexists with the rest of the world despite being so different from the norm should be a good episode, right? Well, anything revolving around Watch or his character surely is, while everything else just kind of falls a little flat.
Just like when you, you know what, man? I can't be bothered right now.
What? What the fuck was that? Anyways, this episode revolves around Watch meeting this girl and the two really hit it off. But it turns out that she's what's called a super being. Basically, it's just a big ball of energy with super intelligence, I guess. In essence, it's more of a metaphor relating to idealistic societal norms. Basically, everything that Watch isn't. And to be with this girl, he has to merge with one of these super beings. And he really mulls this decision over for a while. I mean, he's always felt like a bit of an outsider, and this is the chance to be more normal. But thankfully, his mom unknowingly reminds Watch that he's a fantastic kid just the way he is, which in return makes him realize that if this girl really cared about him, she wouldn't make him change so drastically. Oh, yeah, and Adam accidentally merges with the super being, which just kind of makes him evil. I think this episode figured that there was no real opposing force, so might as well throw one in last minute, which, you know what they say.
All toasters, toast.
What? No. Better late than never is what people tend to say. Dude, what is this, 2008? Get it together. This episode works well as a character study, but in terms of anything else like horror, suspense, or fucking pacing, it's missing the mark. Overall, I think it rounds out to be a little below average. Even with being a massive fan of Watch as a character, this episode really just needed a little extra bite. Fathers and Sons is one of the most by-the-book, completely average episodes in children's horror media, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just, well, average. Just like Artie over here, he's not a good TV or a bad TV, he's just an average TV. In fact, probably even a little bit below average, if you know what I mean. Is that my fucking IP address? You fucking idiot, we live in the same place! But this episode is about these boys camping in the woods while being hunted down by Bigfoot himself. And it's the standard stuff. Being set in the woods, you got some nice lighting, some spooky atmosphere, and a bit too many fake out jump scares. But because it's set in the woods, it's essentially a man versus beast storyline. Things move along well enough, if not just a tad bit cliched. You know what I mean? They first get to the forest and something is slightly off. They hear some strange noises, see some unexplainable markings, they even have a brief encounter with a monster, or in this case Bigfoot, in the dead of night while they're trying to sleep. Even the ending, that I do really like, has been done before, as they devise a scheme to capture Bigfoot, and it works. But they ultimately release the Sasquatch once they see smaller Sasquatch footprints in the mud, coming to the conclusion that Bigfoot was just trying to protect their kids. It's sweet, it's emotional, and it's been done before. Yeah, surprisingly, the misunderstood scary monster just trying to protect their kids from the humans is almost a trope at this point. I'd say it's probably because it's an easy subversion to go to for those types of stories. So yeah, this episode isn't really anything you haven't already seen before, nor does it reinvent the wheel. It's just Spooksville's take on a tried and true classic storyline, which is totally fine, but fine is all it will ever be. It's the last average episode in this series before we get into bigger and better things. But it's another standard story, but this time it's a standard zombie story. Which, I mean, zombies have been around forever at this point. It's kind of hard to have a fresh new take on the concept, especially in 2013. Okay, in 2013, there was a complete oversaturation of zombies in media. Not only did you have the Walking Dead comic book series selling like hotcakes because of the smash hit TV series, but you also had the Telltale games that, just like the other two, were mega popular. And then you had like that really shitty FPS Walking Dead game that nobody talks about anymore. I mean, shit, nobody really talked about it back then, too. I remember I had a friend back in the day who was really hyped for that game, pre-ordered it and everything, and then as soon as it came out, he never talked about it again. So, I think that speaks volumes to the quality on that. But you also had Black Ops 2 Zombies, which by 2013 was still going strong with all of its DLC maps. Can I get a fuck die rise in the comments, please? That map sucked ass. But Mob of the Dead forever and always, though. Oh my god, that was such a good map. Actually, I just played Black Ops 2 Zombies again for the first time in a very long time, very recently, and y'all, let me tell you, it still holds up, and it's amazing. I swear to God, I'm gonna get a haircut. This shit is way too fucking long. And it's so hot in this apartment, Jesus Christ. Or the countless amounts of zombie mobile games that I have personally played throughout all of 7th and 8th grade. What I'm getting at is that by 2013, zombies were everywhere, and this Spooksville episode just blends in with the rest of them. Through the power of witchcraft, our gang ends up in a version of Springsville that is in the middle of a zombie apocalypse, and yeah, there's zombies and shit. Not trying to be dismissive, but that's really all there is to this episode. Well, there is actually one very notable thing about this episode. You see, throughout this entire story, there's a mysterious ninja-like character that saves these kids from time to time and just handles business. But as it turns out, this ninja? Yeah, it's Adam's mom. Yeah, the random average run-of-the-mill zombie episode was apparently the best way to reveal this very pivotal character, to little to no fanfare, might I add. I mean, the mom gets revealed, and then there's a very brief reaction shot from Adam, and then the episode just ends. I just feel like there should have been a little bit more emotional weight here. I mean, look, we spend the first half of this series following clues trying to find Adam's mom, and then she just appears rather abruptly out of nowhere, like, sure, fine, whatever. Normally, despite this being an okay episode, I would say to skip this one because it really isn't that special. But because of the whole mom stuff, a completely skippable episode now requires mandatory viewing if you cared about the whole overarching storyline. But if you don't care about that, then yeah, no harm in skipping this one. The first and only two-parters in this entire series, and also our first 2 episodes of the entire series. And because of that, it's a lot of character introductions and properly setting up this world and the main storyline, which this show does rather well, but it's a bit vanilla. At least we got Adam fighting a CGI scorpion. Surprisingly, really good CGI, especially for the Hub Network of all places.
I mean, Haunting Hour definitely had worse CGI comparatively.
But yeah, this is what this entire two-parter consists of. Adam moves to town while also briefly touching on the whole mother thing. He meets Watch and Sally and writes them off initially before his little encounter, which changes his tone. We get some more information about his mother and this red stone. We get introduced to Anne and the whole witch subplot throughout the series. And as far as these 2 first episodes are concerned, Anne is strictly playing the role of antagonist this time around. But even then, because of the nature of what her character is, she's not really an imposing threat. If you have her be too menacing in her introduction, then it would be harder and a little bit more unbelievable to have future stories where she saves the day in the end. You know what I'm saying? But because of this whole two-parter is strictly just set up for the entire series in general. It's like all appetizer and no entree, and not like in the Chili's Triple Dipper way, where that appetizer could easily suffice as an entree. In fact, people kind of just go to Chili's now to get that. That's the second video in a row where I use the Chili's Triple Dipper as an analogy. I don't know what that means. For me, or the Triple Dipper, honestly, I'm kind of shaken up. Don't get it twisted. All this information is very much needed and it is executed well enough. It lays the foundation and without it, this series wouldn't really work. But it's really just the unfortunate side effect of these ranking videos. Sometimes the crucial episodes within the series end up not being as tantalizing as the typical Monster of the Week style of episodes despite holding more significance in the grand scheme of things. Oh my god. Fucking throwing some commas there, Colin. Jesus Christ. So this episode is decent enough, but just unfortunately had a lot more on its plate than other episodes. Sometimes the simpler an episode is, the better an episode is. And while this one didn't rank very high, it's still a solid time. This story takes the common childhood fear of having a monster in your closet and dialing it up just a notch to make it unique and effective. Essentially, instead of a closet containing a monster, the closet contains a whole entire monster dimension.
Isn't that just Monsters, Inc.?
No, because, well, son of a bitch, I guess you're right. But this episode revolves around Sally getting sucked into this dimension, which, it's no surprise there. Yeah, for some reason, bar none, Sally is always the one getting into danger significantly more than the other two. In that regard, she's essentially the typical damsel in distress archetype, which is a shame, because she's way too smart to be delegated to that role. Yet, that's the role she takes on over the course of the series. But Sally has trouble sleeping, which prompts Adam and Watch to fucking spy on her while she sleeps to see what's going on? What the fuck? Okay, massive red flag aside, turns out spying on a 13-year-old girl has its benefits because they happen to witness firsthand Sally getting whisked away through this portal in her closet. Unfortunately, the portal doesn't appear for just anyone. The portal only comes if you're currently experiencing any sort of fear, and, well, I guess Adam and Watch are just some stone cold badasses because they can't open the portal, so they trick poor Stanley over, proceed to tie him up and scare the shit out of him, which summons the portal. prompting Adam to go in and save the day. The actual monster dimension isn't much, nor is the actual monster. I mean, it's just a guy in a ghillie suit. Probably just trying to play some airsoft with his bros on the weekend. But Sally's all tangled up in this web and can't get loose. But as Adam points out, the web's not sticky at all. Apparently, just like summoning the portal, you need to be scared for this to actually work. Which begs the question, what was Sally so scared of in the first place for all this to transpire? Well, it was a TV commercial. I know it's supposed to be like a comedic revelation and whatnot, but if I'm being honest, off-putting weird commercials was such an authentic fear as a child. Like, do you guys remember the Quiznos Sponge Monkeys commercial growing up? That was a real fucking commercial, by the way. I'm not making this up, you can look it up yourself. But Adam gives one of his famous pep talks and they're able to get out of there unscathed. I think what this episode lacks in scares, it more than makes up for in humor. This is a more comedically inclined episode after all, and the banter between these three in specific are fantastic. However, in a perfect world, the horror could have been better. Genuine horror tends to mix well with humor, while also not undercutting the comedy, but I understand. It's a very delicate and tricky balance to maintain. For some reason, when it comes to these children horror shows and episodes centered around vampires, they tend to lean more into the fun action side of things, rather than strictly scares. And hey, I'm not knocking it. If it works, it works. I mean, bursting into your school dance, dual-wielding holy water spray bottles, and blasting vampires in the face? I dare you to say this isn't absolutely amazing. The only problem is that it takes a while to get to this part, and everything beforehand is kind of just banking on one big bait and switch that anyone could see coming from a mile away.
I mean, I could, and I don't even have eyes.
Wait a minute. So, last week when I put on that outfit and I asked you, do I look good in this? And you said, yeah, you were just lying to me?
I'm gonna plead the fifth on this one.
Okay, so this episode revolves around our main trio trying to figure out who the head vampire is within the school, and they heavily suspect that it's the principal, but like, it's kinda obvious that it's not. Okay, listen, if someone is the end-all be-all prime suspect from the jump in Act 1, they're almost certainly not the perpetrator. Not only that, but Miss Clench is introduced in this episode, and she's just so nice and friendly, and she's helping with the blood drive, and oh yeah, she's the vampire, isn't she? Oh, okay, cool. Who could have saw that coming? Despite being so painfully obvious, it wouldn't be so bad if this didn't take up the majority of this episode. The silver lining is that there is a reveal that I legitimately didn't see coming. So, the principal isn't a vampire, right? But she used to be, and now she's a vampire hunter, actually descending from the Van Helsing family, and is able to give Adam all of her gear to fight these vampires. And it's just a small little detail, but I really like that. It gives this character, who appears in a handful of episodes, just a little bit more depth than once perceived. But despite all the complaints, this ending set piece more than makes up for any of the shortcomings. It's dumb fun action, but well, there is no but. It's just dumb fun action, and it's an absolute treat to watch. I love a good town-wide mind-controlled epidemic story, which I understand is a little bit of a niche genre, but when it hits, it hits. But this episode is fantastic because this one biology teacher ends up getting brainwashed by this one plant he finds during one of his expeditions. And slowly the members of Spooksville fall victim to this plant. And it's great to see people picked off one by one. It's actually very similar to the whole Divine Tree arc in Mob Psycho 100, but just not as good. And no offense to Spooksville by any means, it's just that Mob Psycho 100 is fucking peak. But to my surprise, the final survivor who didn't succumb to the brainwashing powers of this plant is Sally. Yeah, the one who's repeatedly thrown in trouble's way is actually the one to save the day, albeit through the help of Anne. But Sally is the one that delivers the killing blow, so I'm still counting it as her win. Gotta take him where you can get him. Oh, yeah, and the thing that's able to kill the plant is diet soda, of all things. Yeah, there's like some weird ongoing joke throughout the series about diet soda and how everyone hates it and how bad it is for you, and like, sure? It's just a strange well to continuously drink from. My only problem with this episode is the pacing. It's not too slow, but just way too fast. First, it's the teacher who's infected, and then a couple of students, and then fucking everyone. It really just needed some room to breathe to let the suspense or paranoia properly accumulate throughout the episode. So, in the end, it's just a bit too rushed for my personal liking. Spooksville as a series doesn't really delve into the realm of body horror all too much, if at all. In fact, I think this is the only episode that does it proper, and oh boy, did they make it count. While also not explicitly showing off too much detail, which not only is cost effective, but also just effective in general. What starts as a routine procedure of removing Watch's tonsils end up with this woman who is completely comprised of hundreds of tonsils. I mean, it's not too crazy. The same thing happened to me and my dentist, but with teeth. But seriously, this is just so gross. And the sound design of everything really sells this thing. The official explanation is that this woman got into a lab accident and all her fucking organs fell out of her body. But somehow, tonsils were the solution to repair her. So she just started collecting patients' tonsils, and listen, I can make fun of this for making absolutely no sense, but if I did that, then I would have to say the same thing about vampires, Bigfoot, and fucking brainwashing plants. At a certain point, you just gotta roll with the punches. Suspend your disbelief and you'll enjoy a lot more things out there, I promise you. The only shortcoming is the standard complaint that the ending is a true spectacle, and the rest of the episode is just fine enough. It's just this visual that is truly disgusting and really makes this episode worth it in the end. This episode is truly like a modern day Frankenstein, and I mean that literally. The gang finds a corpse that they call Froderick, and they bring it back to life in the exact same fashion as Frankenstein's monster in the original movie, saying the exact same lines and everything. I mean, come on, Froderick just looks like Frankenstein's monster, but like a Russian bootleg Frankenstein's monster. I mean, that tracksuit is putting in some work. And then, and the only time this series ever does this, there's a completely separate storyline within this episode about Adam taking a driver's ed class with a guy who may or may not be a serial killer.
Teach me how to use axes.
There's just one central storyline, but sometimes there is a B story that does tie into our main story. But this episode, just two different things going on. You got Sally and Watch doing Frankenstein stuff, and you got Adam doing driver's ed stuff, and it's great. And I kind of just wish there was more instances of this throughout the entire series. On the Froderick front, Watch uses him to take care of some bullies, but the dude almost just straight up kills them, which draws a lot of eyes to the monster, so Watch and Sally figure it's better to just part ways with the guy and just release him out into the wild. Meanwhile, with Adam, it's just a bunch of witty banter between him and the instructor, and they really lay into the serial killer undertones that make these scenes just super funny. But in the end, he's actually not a serial killer. He was a ghost that just disappears to never be seen again. It feels like the writers had an idea for a Frankenstein episode and a driver's ed serial killer / ghost episode, but neither of those ideas had enough material to warrant a full episode, so they just mashed the two together, and it actually works pretty beautifully. If one storyline was losing some steam, it would just cut to the other one, and it was just a rather refreshing change of pace from the norm. And look, neither of these stories were knocking my socks off or anything like that, but the combination of the two make the whole journey a good watch from start to end. This one has a fun concept. Basically, Sally gets infected with the disease called the fire inside. Basically, it's a ticking time bomb that slowly burns her from the inside out. However, it also allows her to breathe fire. Fire that gets bigger the more she, dies. So it's essentially a race against the clock to cure her before she spontaneously combusts. This in return gives this episode a really nice dose of suspense, as they get really close to her demise by the end. They eventually get the proper materials to save her, but they mix it with diet soda, which, as Anne explains, diet soda somehow makes the disease even worse. Once again, I have no clue what this show has against diet soda, but here we are again. Oh, yeah, very uncharacteristically, Anne is just straight up helping the gang out here, which she actually has ulterior motives. You see, in the end, Anne saves Sally from her horrible fate, and the day is saved. But also in the end, we find out that this was all a part of Anne's master plan, as she was the one who secretly infected Sally with the fire inside in the first place. Her whole end goal was to help them out completely, and in this regard, further gain their trust. But because of how inconsistently the character of Anne is written, this doesn't mean much in the long run. I mean, Anne just constantly bounces around the alignment chart. It's hard to understand what her endgame truly is. I mean, I guess it's getting her own mother back with the whole switcheroo in the end, but she shows remorse for her actions there. So I guess you can say that maybe over the course of the series, she built a serious bond with these three, and any of her prior evil doings are regrettable, but I don't know. But this episode has some of the best suspense in the entire series. Not just because Sally is actively dying throughout the entire episode, but because they're also sneaking around this castle behind these homunculus' backs, trying to find the proper cure. Feeling like a straight up Metal Gear Solid level at moments. My only complaint is that Sally can breathe fire, but she never uses that to her advantage. Like, I just love the juxtaposition that the closer to death that you are, the stronger your fire breath becomes. It's such a neat concept. Like, she's near death, but now these guards aren't the problem because she can just cast level 3 fireballs now. But that never actually happens. Still, it's an episode that will absolutely have you on the edge of your seat throughout the entire thing. Spooksville as a show doesn't do a lot of creature features. Most of the threats in this show are ghosts, or vampires, or just human-looking monsters. I mean, there was that one cat monster, but we don't gotta talk about that one any more than we already have. But in the case of Shellshock, we have this pirate crab-looking guy, and I just love this design from head to toe. It's perfect. Then again, I just really love pirates in general. Pirates of the Caribbean, my beloved. I know you get super rough after the third film, and debatably even the third film, but they can't make me hate you. Okay, maybe the fifth one is like actually really bad. So this episode revolves around Sally's parents trying to bump shoulders with this yacht club, as they desperately want to get in. One of which Sally wants nothing to do with, because, well, what 13-year-old cares about this shit in the first place? But also because the president of the club seems a bit off. And a bit off he is, because as it turns out, he's feeding people to the giant crab monster underneath the docks as a way to appease him. You see, the president happens to be in possession of the pirate crab's treasure chest filled with doubloons, and instead of giving them back to the pirate crab, he takes unsuspecting victims beneath the docks and plants some gold doubloons on them as a form of sacrifice. That way, the president can still keep the hoard of treasure and only sacrifice a couple doubloons to keep his life intact. I guess he's also sacrificing people here. But to this guy, the money is the bigger sacrifice than human life. Which, if you own a yacht, I guess money is more important than life.
Gotta sell your soul to make $1 billion, yeah.
But once Adam and Watch get involved, they come up with the simple solution of just dumping the treasure chest into the ocean, which the president, without much hesitation, dives in afterwards and properly gets got by the crab monster. Which I actually think is the only proper death in this entire series, and you know what? It's completely deserved. In the end, it's a great episode with a great creature. I mean, what else can you really ask for? Spooksville presents a pretty standard ghost story, but, like, it's really good. Probably because it takes place in a lighthouse, and I just love lighthouses as settings. Which makes me think that maybe I should check out that one show, Round the Twist. It's an Australian show that I know a handful of you guys out there have recommended me to check it out to do a ranking video on, and I might just have to at some point. At some point. I have so many shows I gotta do first. And movies. But our story begins with this kid getting snatched right in front of his older sister, and like it's an X-Files episode, our gang reads about it in the papers and decide to go investigate because something isn't adding up. After some light research at the local library, and after Mr. Spine gives Adam his own X-ray library card? What the fuck? That's so cool. But also, I would be concerned about the amount of radiation that camera is emitting. Anyways, they head off to the lighthouse where they quickly find the missing kid all tied up, and they also find this ghost. So the whole lighthouse investigation is beautifully creepy. Just 3 kids walking through narrow dark corridors with nothing but a pair of flashlights. And then this ghost lady is just doing ghost lady things, scaring the shit out of these kids and even the audience. Don't get me wrong, it's very standard stuff, but it's executed rather well. Eventually they piece together the truth, and it's ever so slightly convoluted. Okay, so the ghost lady, when she was alive, lost her kid. He fell into the ocean and never returned. Okay, cool. So she kidnapped this kid because it reminds her of her own kid, right? Well, yeah, technically that is why she is kidnapping this kid. But as it turns out, this kid is actually her great-grandkid. Yeah, so the ghost's kid that fell into the ocean actually washed up on the shore later on with no memory, and was put into an orphanage and got adopted. So they just relay the information to this ghost that, hey, your kid actually survived, and the ghost is finally able to move on. This wasn't really needed. I suppose it was written this way to have a somewhat happier ending and a somewhat easier method to get the ghost to move on. Because think about it, the alternative ending would be telling this ghost lady that her child died and she needs to move the fuck on. And while I think that would have been a more poignant ending, I understand for a kids show, it might be a bit much. Although, I don't think kids shows should dumb down heavy subject matters. I still understand it through a network perspective though. So I wish the ending had a little bit more respect within regards to its audience, but at the same time, everything beforehand was so good, I can't knock it too much. The Wishing Stone looks like it's gearing up to be the Spooksville's take on a classic Be Careful What You Wish For storyline. I mean, our main trio literally find a stone that grants wishes, but only 2 wishes are made initially, and none with any repercussions. Watch just wishes for the ability to eat anything, which, okay. The dude just wanted to munch on some drywall like in My Strange Addiction.
And I'm addicted to eating drywall. I am literally eating my house.
Personally, I think pink fiberglass insulation always looked the most appetizing to me. Comment down below what dangerous thing you always thought looked good to eat. And Sally wishes for a robot clone of herself to do her chores for her. So instead of a Be Careful What You Wish For story, this episode is more about paying off debts. You see, unbeknownst to our main characters, those wishes weren't free, as this robot guy, they call the debt collector, swings by to collect payments, but they soon realize they're fucked. Sally and Watch owe this guy 800,000 glatons, which is his world's form of currency. For frame of reference and what the debt collector points out, if you took all the currency on Earth and combined it together, it would only be equivalent to about 3 whole glatons. But luckily, they can work off their debts, as the debt collector explains that just 6 full days of hard work on his planet, their debt would be paid off. Except 1 day on his home planet is equivalent to 23 years on Earth. So they just proceed to kick his ass and make a mess of the house in the process, which makes Adam's dad rightfully pissed. So Adam just decides to come clean and tell his dad the truth. Not just about the robot laying dead in the yard, but about everything. He explains all of the weird stuff going around Spooksville and even all the stuff revolving around his own mother. Keep in mind, this is episode 7, so this is before the mom re-enters the picture. Just for clarification. His dad decides to mull it over for a while the kids decide to handle the robot who has rebuilt himself at this point. Except this time, he's not falling down. You see, one cool thing about this debt collector is that he's able to adapt to anything. If you kick him once, that's gonna hurt and do some damage. But if you kick him again, now he's just immune to kicks. So anything they do ends up working, but it only works once. And after a certain point, this guy just becomes invincible. Eventually, Sally decides to sacrifice herself and settle all of their debts by working on the robot's home planets. But it turns out it was all just one big trick, because that wasn't really Sally. That was her robot clone that she wished for. I think that's the only time a wish has solved a problem on these types of shows, so, good on you, Sally. But unfortunately, Adam's dad decides that this town is just too unsafe for them to live in, knowing what he knows now, and they just abruptly move out. However, Adam still never made a wish yet, and you only get one wish per person, by the way. So Adam simply wishes to go back in time and prevent himself and his friends from ever finding the wishing stone in the first place. And I guess the debt collector just can't do anything about time travel, so he gets off scot-free. But this really is just a great episode. This is the last episode of the entire series, and it's a complete deconstruction of the entire show, which is pretty funny because I compared this show to Eerie Indiana at the very start of this video. And Eerie Indiana had a very similar final episode in terms of deconstruction. You know, except Eerie Indiana was significantly way more meta and just completely shattered that fourth wall. But instead of that, Adam wakes up in a world that's completely normal. There's no ghosts or vampires or even witches. It's almost like this whole series so far was just one bad dream. Adam is now the typical athletic, popular kid, while at the same time, his relationships with all of his friends are completely different now. Like, Watch is now more of a stereotypical nerdy kid archetype, and he's no longer wearing his watches? What the fuck? But also, him and Adam aren't friends. In fact, when Adam approaches Watch thinks he's picking on him. And Sally is now the typical popular girl cheerleader archetype and hates Adam, while Anne is no longer a witch and is just a typical girl. Oh, and Adam's girlfriend as well. And on top of all of this, the once magical stone that Adam possessed is just a regular old stone now. This all accumulates when who is like a student counselor, but also like a therapist, tells Adam that he's been making everything up in his head as some sort of coping mechanism for dealing with the disappearance of his mother. And if he ever wants to get over this, he must let go of this stone as a symbol of letting go of the past. And yeah, it's all one big trick. Turns out it was just one big magical spell put on by Anne's mom to trick Adam into handing over the magical stone. It reminds me a lot of that one episode of Community where the fake therapist tries to gaslight the study group into thinking the entire stint at Greendale was just one big shared psychosis in a psych ward. But Adam eventually sees through the entire thing and just smashes the stone into tiny pieces, so that in the end, nobody wins. And the whole series ends with Adam being reassured that his mom, his real mom, is truly out there and alive somewhere. But we never got a season 2, so who cares? This may have not been the best episode in the entire series, but this by far is probably one of the best ways to end this show. This episode is absolutely fantastic, and it actually reminds me a lot of the God's Mouth creepypasta if you haven't read that one. It's honestly one of the better creepypastas out there if I'm being real. I've actually been kicking around the idea of doing a ranking video on all of the creepypastas out there. I don't know how I will do it, considering there is so many creepypastas out there, but I figure if enough of you guys ask for it and show interest in it, I'll figure something out in the end. But while trying to find clues about Adam's mom, our trio ends up in a cave that slowly gets hotter and hotter as the ground becomes acidic. As it turns out, this cave isn't an ordinary cave. It's a living, breathing cave, and these three are currently being digested. And they better hurry and figure a way out, or they'll end up like all these skeletons on the ground. This eventually leads our characters to the brain of the cave, and where the cave uses Sally as a mouthpiece to directly talk to Adam and Watch. But one thing leads to another, and these three get sneezed out in the nick of time, and Adam ends up finding a Letterman jacket that belongs to his mom long ago, with a mysterious key inside. The key in question just unlocks a couple doors in the castle. It's honestly nothing too special, but for the moment being, watching this episode for the first time, not knowing what this key led to, it seemed like this key would have big implications. I may have flown by this episode rather fast, but that's because a lot of what this episode does right is in its atmosphere, and really should be watched on your own accord to truly get its effects. This is the second episode of the entire series, and they're coming out with the absolute heat. I mean, this episode takes place on Halloween, which is a big positive in my book. But it also just has this really good foreboding vibe throughout the entire episode. Basically, our main trio end up following this one kid into this old dusty house, and then from there into this small tent that actually leads them to a carnival looking area. Everyone here is all dressed up and there's fun games as far as the eye can see, but beyond that, it's just an empty, dark void. Weirder yet, everyone dressed up is on the older side. Think 30s, 40s, or even 50 years old, and yet they have the same cadence as little kids. A couple of them even say they want to go home and see their mom. And then Marvin the magician comes out, who is just some little kid. And from the jump, it's very clear that despite his stature, he is the one that's in charge here, as he is able to perform real magic and keeps everyone in line. Worse yet, our trio start taking on the properties in which they are dressed up as. So Adam, dressed as a ghost, becomes more ghost-like. Watch starts talking in a more southern accent, and despite being a fairy, Sally doesn't exhibit any changes for the moment being. We eventually get the scoop on Marvin. Turns out many years ago, Marvin was really sick and was visited by a witch, who gave him the ability to perform real magic. And she stated that if Marvin tricks kids to coming and staying in the house, she'll cure him for good. So it's a tragic tale of a kid who never grew up, just wanting to be healthy again and just doing what he was told as a means to be cured. But nobody over all these years could even oppose Marvin because of his magical prowess. Until now. Because Sally has a magic fairy wand that now exhibits property of magic. And so our three main characters are able to defeat Martin, but Adam makes sure to have a little heart-to-heart with Marvin, and it's a very sweet and sincere moment. And every adult here turns back into little kids and are finally able to move on. Despite being a sweet ending, there is still a darker undertone here, but that being said, it's a very good episode. I'm going to be a little vague with this one as to not rob anyone of their first time viewing this episode, because damn, this one is really good.
I mean, it's fucking number one.
But this episode sees Adam and Watch entering the mind of the mayor, an ex-mayor turned homeless man. He is the most reoccurring side character throughout the entire series. He has multiple cardboard box setups throughout the entire town and often knows more than he lets on, despite most people writing him off as a simple crazy person. So I was just so surprised that this character has a spotlight episode, and I was so surprised at how layered this character really is. His mind isn't what it used to be, it's fragmented, parts are missing, and it's getting worse. So not only do you have the immediate peril of two characters trying to survive in a mind that is essentially collapsing in on itself, but you have the tragic tale of this character. I mean, look at his mind space. It's all covered in cardboard, a reflection of the current life he leads. But even in some of his earlier memories, the cardboard still follows. The only place that is untainted by cardboard is this one memory of him dancing with some mysterious woman. A girlfriend, perhaps a wife? We don't know. But it's clearly that out of all of his memories, this is the one he is most keen on preserving just the way it is. which is why he freaks out when he catches the boys there in the first place. It reminds me a lot of Psychonauts, specifically Psychonauts 2 with the Agent Crawler levels. If you've played that game before and watched this episode, you'd really understand the connection even more. It's a heartbreaking story through and through, while also maintaining the scares and even a little bit of humor. At the same time, it's somewhat of a tragic tale with a somewhat hopeful yet bittersweet ending that I can't help but to call absolutely beautiful. So that was Spooksville, a short-lived but very beloved series. But it is that time again where I ask you guys, what should I rank next? Please leave a comment down below. I write down every series people recommend me to rank, and I keep a running tally of each one, so I know which one is the most popular by the amount of times it is commented. Anyways, if you like the video, like the video. If you aren't subscribed, subscribe, because I got a lot more of these kind of videos coming out in the near future. And as always, thank you for watching.